Greetings from the dark and cold northern reaches. In truly black metal fashion, it is I, Mr. Patriarch, joined by Auron MacIntyre. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I see you're quite busy these days. I noticed this morning, morning, my time, that you were having a stream with Alex Kashuda making some easy dunks on Sam Harris.
Yeah, we scheduled that one because I just knew Alex was going to be a great guest in general, and I hadn't had her on in a long time. And then I was like, "Well, what are we going to talk about? We'll figure something out." And then out of nowhere, that podcast drops. It's like, well, this won't be a hard one. Then this sometimes content drops in your lap, and that's what happened with that one. So I think it went pretty well.
Excellent. Now, briefly on that, I've seen some posts on Twitter of some people saying that, oh, this is going to like torpedo Sam Harris's career. Like he just like self-immolated on camera on trigonometry. I have an opinion on that, but what was your guys' take on that sort of line of thought?
We didn't really talk much about Sam's kind of career going forward. We hope in some ways this discredits the idea that there'll be kind of this fusion between rationalism or the IDW or however you want to characterize that and kind of the new right. This kind of shows that friend enemy distinction, shows that clear fissure. So probably puts the death knell on that, I would hope. But it probably doesn't kill Sam Harris because let's be honest, most of Sam Harris's hardcore audience agrees with him entirely, right? They hold the same religious viewpoint that he does. And they're very proud that they see it as a non-religious viewpoint. So I think some people at the edges of his audience will probably look at what he said, much like the trigonometry people he was on there with. These are people who are fans of his, and even they were kind of like, "Ooh, I don't know, man. That sounds a little rough." So you'll probably see some of that, but I think Sam's probably still got a future of churning out podcasts for people who want to feel like they're slightly out of step with the regime, but still well within the bounds of good liberalism.
Yeah, that was more or less my take too. Like Sam Harris's audience, I think. I mean, if they're still listening today, I mean, they're going to listen tomorrow, basically, because I mean, they hold the same worldview and presuppositions and prejudices as Sam Harris himself. So for those who are like, making victory laps thinking that this is the end of Sam Harris as a quote unquote public intellectual, I think they're going to be disappointed. Although for the people who are, I don't know, man, like Hunter Biden, just to find having a snuff dungeon on his laptop, not mattering. I think a lot of them will sort of look at that and be like, yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, you really hope they'll look at something like that and be like, yeah, I don't really care about how many nice conversations Ben has with this guy. At the end of the day, he would be happy to throw me in the gulag, and so maybe turning my back to this guy, pretending like he has my back, isn't the best idea. So
absolutely. So now, as fun as it is to dunk on Sam Harris, the topic for this show today is actually going to be on reactionary themes in metal and rock a little bit, but mostly with an emphasis on metal. If you guys are new here, thanks for coming by. Mr. Patriarch is the channel. I do history, kind of meta politics, just a potpourri of stuff I find interesting, some things on orthodoxy, religion. I don't claim to be an expert on those. I am just an educated layman. That's all I am. So do not come to me for spiritual advice or anything like that. If you want to support the channel, links, of course, to subscribe to our PayPal can be found below. And before we begin in full, Auron, do you have anything in particular that you would like to shill before we get started?
Not really. I just had that stream with Alex, so if people haven't checked that out, that's a good place to go. I'll also probably have the next chapter of my book up on my Substack before the month is out. So if people want to read that, will be like the third chapter. They can subscribe over there.
Excellent. Also, if you want to find Auron on Twitter or his YouTube channel, I believe I've posted at least those in the description to this video. So let us begin. Reactionary themes in metal. Now, I see right behind your head
Yep.
a certain famous album by one Ronnie James Dio. And I think this really sort of ties into sort of what we're talking about. Very first is the aesthetic of metal. So a lot of metal bands, just the very vibe. So if you take the lyrical content aside or any messaging that they may or may not have, if you just sort of take the aesthetic of metal, particularly these days, and very much in Europe, and also with starting in the 80s, you really saw it a lot with Dio, this sort of fascination with the whole swords and sorcery
Mhm.
kind of aesthetic of metal, triumphant heroes battling monsters and stuff. There is a very clear hearkening to the past with just the very flavor of metal that you see visually presented, taking the substance aside. What would you say as far as the reactionary aesthetic of certain strands of metal?
Yeah, the metal I prefer, there's lots of great metal, that there are black metal bands that I enjoy and stuff, but I really like power metal. And I like power metal because specifically it has a lot of the elements you're talking about, right? It's a lot of swords and sorcery. It's a lot of guys singing about historical battles. I love Iced Earth has this whole album
Oh yeah,
about like the American battles. They've got Gettysburg and the Revolutionary War and everything on there. Even bands like Iron Maiden that are a little more mainstream still have songs about like Alexander the Great and the Ides of March and all kinds of stuff in there, and so it really appeals to me that way. Also, the as you say, I like to rotate my different albums back there. Those are record covers because I collect the vinyls, and so I just love the look. Like it's just beautiful. Like
yeah.
it captures that very like you said, a lot of swords and sorcery, a lot of classical, historical, beautiful artwork. It captures a particular mood, and so that's what always has drawn me to that, particularly the power metal aspect. Yeah,
Yeah, very much agreed. That is one thing that I think metal has over other genres of music. Is if you look at a lot of metal album covers and then compare them to like, hip hop album covers, for
yeah,
example. I mean, there's just no comparison. Like the amount of detail and artistry. A lot of these, even to this day, are like hand drawn, and again, sort of evoke very oftentimes, especially in like power metal and stuff, this kind of um, hearkening to the past and like glorification of the nation or crusades or what have you. And it's really cool. I've always appreciated that. And even the things that are less sort of historical, things that are sort of maybe more dark. Um, Another thing with the aesthetic of metal that I find is you don't really find all that much in other types of pop music is this recognition of sort of the dark side of
yeah.
humanity, the dark side of not only people as individuals, but the dark side of power and how it corrupts and the incentives and just the general kind of bleak outlook on like social institutions and individuals is another thing that you find very often within the metal aesthetic, just coming through the sound and the artwork and the album covers and stuff, set aside from any lyrical substance.
Yeah, I think that point you had there was really interesting because every genre of music has some attempt to kind of deal with the human condition, right? Like they deal with some issues, difficulties. Even pop music, country music, of course, like they do this. But I feel like metal has a particular grasp on the more gruesome and difficult aspects of things like war, statecraft, historical truths, and then just like the darker parts of the human condition that most people wouldn't talk about. It's not that there's anything wrong with addressing like relationship issues or those kind of things, the difficulty of work, that kind of stuff. That's all good things. I love listening to that type of music too. But metal particularly addresses kind of those darker areas, those more difficult areas of the human condition that a lot of other genres wouldn't really go to. And again, you see that in the artwork of the albums just as much as you do in the lyrics or the music. One of the things I like about metal is, usually you're not supposed to judge things by the cover, but I can pretty reasonably guess if I'm going to enjoy an album of a band I've never heard of by looking at the art. Like, it's actually a relatively good indicator for me, so I like that aspect.
Definitely. I would certainly agree with that. Now, one of the other things that you see um, with so much of pop culture and sort of top down culture sort of being targeted against what you might call traditional Western civ, or American European identity or whatever. Very much, especially like you were talking about in power metal, there's like an overt embracing of that, and you find
Mhm.
it in particularly in a lot of European bands, like uh, Iron Maiden. Even it's the whole. It's a bit of like bulldog nationalism, like as Morgoth calls it. The Spitfires and
That's
Churchill.
definitely Iron Maiden. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
but at the same time, it's not putting down the country, and it's sort of embracing the past. And then you also have songs which are sort of more historically um, rooted, even coming from Iron Maiden. Songs like "The Trooper," I think it's either
Mhm.
about the charge of the Light Brigade, I think it is, or the Battle of Poltava, one of the two. I tried to decipher that one, and just this sort of reminiscing on the past of your society and nation. Um, you find that in Iron Maiden, and then also you have all kinds of other subgenres of metal, like folk metal and Viking metal, and that's
Mhm.
basically all it is. Like bands like Korpa Kalani is basically just like a Finnish like folk deification with accordions and electric guitar, or Viking metal bands like Amon Amarth is all about like just Norse mythology and just basking in that sort of thing. And um, that is one thing which I think kind of makes metal unique in a way, in a similar way that like a lot of country music or American folk music like basks in sort of a traditional Americana, and doesn't really apologize for it. Metal sort of does that, but with distortion and loud amplifiers.
Yeah, I really enjoy bands like Sabaton that are, looking at the martial history of a large amount of Europe, that kind of thing. Bands like Visigoth, there's guys I had on my channel, Judicator, who go through this different historical periods, and really, again, they explore very unique times. They look at Napoleon, or they look at the First Crusade. They look at times that you would never normally see songs written about in any other genre. And it does have a particular European bent. I mean, like you said, a lot of this comes from Sweden, comes from Denmark, comes from a lot of those countries, so it's going to be rooted in those. There's a big, of course, German scene in metal as well, and so a lot of these bands are from the particular, and afraid aspects of their history, the way that I guess others would shy away from it. So I think that's kind of an undeniable part of metal as well.
Yes, and another thing too is it's sort of one of these cultural um, or one of these subcultures, styles of music, which is kind of fundamentally European. I think
Hmm.
it came from the UK and the United States. That's sort of where it has its roots. It's originally kind of an Anglo music, if you want to look at it that way, where of course it takes the blues as kind of a basis for itself. So like if you listen to a band like Blue Cheer from like the from the 60s, they're one of the bands that sort of took the blues format and then just like turned it up to 11, and as sort of like a proto metal
Hmm.
phenomenon. But then what makes it different, and a band like Black Sabbath really pioneered this, is it took the sort of blues formula and then it made it dark,
Yeah.
essentially. And then they sort of turned it into this thing, which is very much kind of a product of, I think, sort of a Northern European just sort of product. Like you wouldn't find this sort of music kind of come out of, Africa or South America or whatnot. And although metal did become really popular in these places, particularly, I know there's like a really big lot of metal fans in Brazil, for instance.
Yeah, I was gonna say
the the origins of metal and sort of its association, I think, are distinctly Western, and that's something which, when you compare it to other types of modern culture that we have nowadays, you don't find a whole lot of that. It's either a lot of modern pop culture over the past couple of decades it is Western in like the very worst sense, and where it's like trying to sort of globalize and homogenize and like take things which exist and like dilute them and stuff. Whereas metal is more of an embracing of and accepting of this sort of traditional Western sort of spirit or ethos, and then funneling it into a musical form which kind of evokes that.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about metal is, like you said, it really is a particular mood and aesthetic more than it is anything else. There's things that are not so loud or distorted, but are metal, and then there are things that are very loud and distorted, but people wouldn't count them as metal. And so, like, what sets them apart, it really is that particular feel. Metal's more of a feeling than anything else as a genre. And so, I feel like you have to. It needs its origin in kind of that cold, dreary. It needs that to produce that feeling, to produce that. Obviously, like I said, it does have a global reach. There are, there are many people who can enjoy it outside of that, but that really does help generate that. And I think that's why it's so, distinctly tied to it. I think, again, also the fact that it is so often rooted in history and rooted in certain layers of tradition give it a particularity that those other genres don't have, that you were talking about, the kind of that general pop music that's trying to universalize and globalize. You can obviously, like, there is versions of that with metal, but I think the stuff that has been very successful has been tied to a lot. Like you said, there's a big rise in like Viking metal and folk metal and stuff, because I think it ties into something very particular and celebrates it. So I think that even though you do have some attempt to kind of have that wider reach, and obviously there are people from many different cultures who can enjoy it, I think it does require some level of rooting in kind of that tradition to truly have that feel that makes it metal.
Yeah, definitely. And from sort of if I could go sort of on like a music theory nerd tangent, although a lot of early metal was sort of rooted in the blues, what you saw over time, and particularly this began to really take place in the 1970s, and it really took off in the 1980s as well, I think is when it really became extremely prominent, was you had the incorporation of classical composition techniques in metal. So basically getting away from the pentatonic scales all over the place, or the blues song structure, started having more kind of linear song structures. So instead of sort of a form where you have your one chord, your four chord, your one chord, your five chord, your four chord, your one chord, like with the 12-bar blues, now you're starting to use, even especially today, like tons of modes and like different weird chord groupings and bizarre song structures, which really mimic more of kind of traditional Western classical music. And a good example of this, which you can find even back in the 70s, would be a band like Rainbow, which was Dio's band that he started with Ritchie Blackmore, the guitarist of Deep Purple. And it was sort of embraced this sort of swords and sorceries aesthetic. And then also in terms of compositional techniques and Blackmore solos and stuff, began to get a little bit more away from the sort of standard blues formula. And then in the 80s, of course, you have and you can like him or not like him, but you have this sort of neoclassical shredder guys like
Yeah, you got Malmsteen. Yeah.
yeah, like Yngwie Malmsteen, and then Kristen Pelletieri, uh, Jason Becker, Marty Friedman, who basically take electric guitar and sort of the metal feel and then basically rewrite types of classical music with this instrumentation and sound. And then even if you listen to a band like Metallica, they will, if you listen to Kill 'Em All, their very first album, it still has quite a lot of this kind of bluesy vibe. Like if you listen to Seek and Destroy, still a lot of sort of pentatonic usage and stuff. But then you listen to an album like Master of Puppets, and then it begins to get these more elaborate song structures, much less blues focused. And then an album like Injustice for All really sort of takes that track they were on and just sort of they crank it up as much as they can. So, more weird time signatures, more different, more riffs, more long songs, so on and so forth. And then you begin to see this sort of embrace, whether subconsciously or whether consciously or not, of trying to mimic sort of more classical compositional techniques, which are distinctly sort of European and less rooted in the blues, which sort of was its initial founding point.
Well, and one of my favorite metal bands is Savatage. Of album right over here. But Savatage is, of course, starts as this very, very metal band, kind of half thrash, but moving its way towards like progressive metal, and eventually they morph into the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, right? That's actually. So even if you haven't heard Savatage, yes, you have heard Savatage actually, because you've heard that song they play every Christmas. But obviously that's that full embrace, right? Like, and you see that with a lot of these progressive metal bands. They start moving, many of them move towards more a mix of classical compositions. Again, you also see this a lot in power metal. People like Blind Guardian will include entire orchestral or suites like in their in their albums in between their different metal. And so you see this blending of classical European music along with the metal. Sometimes it's different compositions inside the same album. Sometimes they're actually putting the metal and the orchestration together. But you see this interplay. These are certainly connected arts. And then these all guys, it's also very technical. Metal obviously is often a very technical genre, which also lends itself to blending with these more complicated classical compositions in a way that others couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, metal is like one of the few genres where the term virtuoso is thrown around a lot. So, of course, virtuoso in the classical sense was like a great pianist, a great violinist, a great organ player. But that term really only sort of, in terms of popular music, the only places you find it now is in like people talking about metal guitar players or drummers or bassists who get no respect. They're like Rodney Dangerfield, they get no respect. Or you also find that in jazz a little bit too. Mm-hmm. And mostly in jazz, it's also the type of jazz, which again sort of gets away from this sort of standard form of, sort of basically blues is kind of how it sort of started off with. And now they're embracing these other sort of classical compositional techniques, using modes, using weird song structures, and so on and so forth. And another thing too is taking this sort of classical element of it aside, you also have the embracing of sort of folk instrumentation and folk traditions and folk aesthetics in a lot of these bands too. Like I mentioned, Korpiklani. So they're not like writing sonatas or anything, but they're using instrumentation which is sort of native to Finland, and creating songs about sort of Finnish folk tales and whatnot. And so it gives it a less sort of a pan-European, classical songwriting process, and something which is more localized but still authentically European for that specific part of the country.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't have anything to add. That I was just agreeing.
Yeah. Or like another band would be Aelstrom, right? So they're
pirate metal.
Pirate metal, and they're distinctly like, it's got a Scottish, like Anglo-Scots sort of sea shanties vibe to it. So like you listen to it and you're like, this wouldn't be German. This isn't Swiss or anything. This is clearly from the British Isles, like when you listen to it. But that's another example. So sort of getting away from kind of the aesthetic and sort of the European character of metal, let's sort of talk about some of the more kind of reactionary themes that you can find in a lot of these songs. And again, if anyone has any good sort of like shout outs or like music suggestions or any questions, feel free to shoot a question over in the chat and we'll try and answer them later. And if you want to send a super chat, obviously that is supported as well. So reactionary themes of metal, we had talked about this a little bit early on with the embrace or the acknowledgement of the dark side of human character, the respect for sort of tradition and veneration of the past. But let's try and sort of hone in on some specific bands or songs that we can sort of use to elucidate this idea of sort of metal having this sort of pretty strong reactionary undercurrent. So what are some acts, or what are specifically some bands or songs that sort of you listen to it and you're like, that's pretty based?
The entire Man of War library, right? Like, it's just like, I know some people are like, they're cartoons, whatever. Like, no, they're great. Like, if you're not here to be like unironically excited about that, then what are you doing listening to metal? I don't understand. Like, Man of War is unapologetically about like combat and masculinity and brotherhood against the world, right? Like, it's very much an embrace of very classic masculine ideas, and again, in a very unironic way. They're not winking at you, right? Like, this is something they are genuinely celebrating and enjoying. Conquest, battle, womanizing, going out fighting with the bros, having each other's backs at all times. And I think one of their albums is called Battle Hymns. Like, it's just that's what they're about, right? And there's a lot of bands like that, again, throughout metal. One of the things metal does that, again, other genres don't, is really embrace the celebration of kind of that martial and conquest outlook that others would shy away from. It's not trying to make apologies most of the time for that stuff. It's just recounting it. It's embracing it. It's the glorious tale of the deeds by the bard, updated in a very manly and aggressive way. And so that being a power metal fan, that's my favorite aspect of its embrace. But obviously, it also does different aspects of that through things like black metal, that kind of stuff.
No, that's a good point. And one of the things that I think, especially nowadays, with a lot of just the sort of cynicism and kind of postmodern lens through which everyone sort of like looks at everything, there's this. I think sort of what you said, when people critique a band like Man of War or something, they're like, oh, it's corny, it's not real. Like, these guys don't really think this. They're just like trying to sell records or whatever. But I really do think that's kind of more of a reflection on like the audience or like the critics. But let's say not the audience, but the critics who sort of like, they're like, all right, like, what's the grift here? But like, really, if you sort of like listen to some of these interviews with some of these bands, they are actually like, we kind of unironically like this stuff. And, these are like kind of cool things. And we're not saying everything in the past is great, but there is something to like, brotherhood and, fighting for your country and, valor and great deeds and, things like that, which in this modern era and sort of this modern sort of globalized culture are kind of just like looked down on or looked at with skepticism, shall we say.
Yeah, for the modern, listener, history is something to, especially Western history is something to be reviled, right? Like, oh, how, we don't do that anymore. Sure, yeah, we took over a couple continents, but we don't do that anymore, even though we're like funneling money to Ukraine right now. But like, yeah, no, we don't do that anymore, right? And so that's something to look down on. Those are deeds to be ashamed about. You need to that masculine approach is toxic. It's something to be ashamed of. And again, that's what I love about metal. Like, obviously there are people out there doing this kind of stuff ironically, but for the most part it is really embraced. It is a celebration of those things again. And I think that's why you have an overlap with again the swords and sorcery stuff, because even though that's not strictly historical, it's another place where people can still find a celebration of kind of those more traditional and masculine virtue. Like, it's okay to to hew to faith and family and tribe, and it's okay to battle for kind of the betterment of your group and that kind of thing. And it's all right to go out there and do uh heroic deeds, for the acclaim of women and that kind of stuff. Just things that are very masculine. Again, probably something you could communicate in something like rap. It's very safe to say those things in something like rap, in that context, but people shy away from saying it in kind of music, pop music in general. But you do still see that celebrated in something like metal.
Exactly. Yeah. And speaking of power metal bands, Rhapsody of Fire is one such
That's a
band
good one.
like Manowar that we could recommend. So if you're into the swords and sorcery and the neoclassical vibes, they're good for you. And Manowar also, there's like just being goofy for a little bit in the world of like symphonic metal and like power metal. There's like a checklist of like achievements, and like the top achievement is to have like Christopher Lee do a narration or whatever on your album or something. And Rhapsody of Fire actually did have Christopher Lee on like their last album, like right before he died, like do some vocal or do some narration about like some giants or whatever. So yeah, that's like a top power metal achievement. So
Nice.
nowadays you'd have to like summon the ghost of Christopher Lee, or I don't know.
Which,
Is there?
if you get the right black metal band, they might be able to do that.
Yeah. And that sort of leads us over into black metal. Now, black metal is interesting because it is extremely harsh. I'm not like the biggest fan of black metal. I think a lot of it in terms of recording, well, in terms of the recording style, a lot of it to me sounds like it was recorded with like an old cell phone in a trash can. So the production just just isn't necessarily for me. But I do occasionally. It can be fun. But there's also, of course, as made famous by or infamous by Varg Vikernes, there is a pretty strong anti-Christian undercurrent to black metal. But that aside, you do find a lot of, particularly in a band like Burzum, or yeah, we'll just say with that, this pretty extreme far right associations in terms of lyrics and sort of ideas and philosophy of the band members. Or I guess it was a one-man project, so we'll just say Varg. So, but that's another example of sort of embracing sort of reactionary ideas. And even if they, from, sort of my perspective as, a Christian, even if they sort of go off the rails and can be a little nihilistic at times, I really do think that is something which you really don't find in pretty much any other type of genre of music. Like there's no, for lack of a better term, like wignats in like other genres of music that
Yeah.
much. You'd only really find it in like certain weird little niche corners of the metal sphere.
Yeah, I tend to not be as familiar with death metal or with black metal, like you said, just because I tend to the basic tier, like Satanism or whatever, that seems to be an entry level for some of those bands. I'm just like, man, I don't want to waste my time with that. But there are, I do like Death. I do like a few of those, battle bands that would kind of fall into that sphere. I enjoy listening to some of that, and of course, there are extremely technical people in that genre who are very gifted. But like I said, I do tend towards more the power metal side, just for a lot of reasons. It's more my speed. I enjoy the soaring vocals a little more than I enjoy the growling. Though I do, there are bands that go the other direction that I do enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm just looking over here. Opinions on doom metal. I like doom metal. I think it's pretty interesting. I was some years ago, I was really into a lot of stoner rock, stoner metal, and doom metal. It was like kind of a Venn diagram where all those sorts of subgenres overlap quite a bit. And I mean, if you want sort of like stage one doom metal, I mean, Black Sabbath is really kind of the guys who sort of pioneered that whole sound, the slow, dark type of music. So yeah, I'm a big fan. As far as newer doom metal bands, bands like Crowbar, which is from Louisiana, they sort of go after that sound as well. A little more heavy, and the vocals are sort of like, love it or hate it kind of thing. But they get into some extremely reactionary themes. Crowbar does. Explicitly religious, pro sort of like Christian lyrics. And they're not like I talked about this last week, but they're not like a Christian band,
Mm-hmm.
but the band has like Christians in it. And there's just all of this reactionary, you could call it, subject matter within a band like Crowbar. So again, they have an album called Sever the Wicked Hand, which is, I mean, you can guess what that's about. This is an explicit biblical reference. Another album, The Serpent Only Lies, which again, explicit biblical reference. Songs about getting over drug overdose, guardian angels, brotherhood, things like this. So yeah, you'll find quite a bit of that in sort of doom metal. And over here on the subject of doom metal, Candlemass.
I was gonna say Candlemass. I'm not always on for the doom metal, but I love Candlemass. Like I can listen to them all day long. So yeah, if you're gonna start anywhere, Black Sabbath is always the right place. But you follow that up with Candlemass, because that's a really excellent band as well.
Yeah, Candlemass is good. And what was that other band? I'm trying to remember. It was another one of these doom metal bands that was kind of around at the same time as Candlemass. It's driving me crazy now. I'll have to drop it, but I'll see if I can think of it later.
Well, on the subject you were talking about kind of not being an explicitly Christian band, but having those themes, there do seem to be a decent amount of those in metal, right? Like there's a decent amount of them that are, because there are guys like Stryper, and I love Stryper. I'm a huge Stryper fan. That's one of my favorite metal bands, but obviously they're explicitly Christian, right? But then you have guys like Tourniquet, which are very much have those themes in there, but it's not it's not always like preaching at you. It's not, there's so I think there's a decent undercurrent of that as well, even though you don't think you would initially find that in metal. Actually, there are, funny enough, kind of the deeper you go into metal, the more you find some of those bands that kind of have those undertones and those consistent kind of references in their work.
Yes, I think the band I was trying to remember was called Saint Vitus.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, another sort of 80s era doom metal band, kind of like Candlemass. Now, you also have another thing, and we talked about this last week when I had Michael Witkoff, Brother Augustine, on, when we're talking about specifically spiritualism and Christianity in metal lyrics. One of the things that we brought up a lot is, or a number of times, is the kind of anti-materialist aspect of metal. So you find a lot of this in the lyrical content of a lot of these bands, sort of like this dissatisfaction, this angst with
Mhm.
just sort of the world as it exists, and like, chasing money for money's sake, and the sort of the corruption of humanity, and how we need to sort of be reaching for something more, something transcendent, even if they don't sort of say what that is. Just the very fact that there's this desire there to sort of get above the sort of base human desires that we have. I think that is a real thing, which you find all over metal. Um, I noticed that a lot in as far as specific scenes or subgenres. I really liked the melodic death metal bands from Sweden, the Gothenburg metal scene. So bands like In Flames or Dark Tranquility. Um, when I listen to the lyrics, or when I listen to some of those songs, the vibe that I continually get is, again, this sort of it is a little bleak and it can be nihilistic times, but there's this recognition I find in a lot of the lyrics where they're kind of reaching for something beyond, and they don't know exactly sort of like how to phrase it or what it is. And these guys aren't religious themselves, but there's this acknowledgement for the need to kind of transcend the sort of rank materialism.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. At the end of the day, metal is primarily an angry young man genre, and most of it is general, just not being happy with the system. But a big part of it ends up being looking at the fact that the things that you're kind of told to pursue are empty and meaningless, and that can become nihilist, but it can also become something else. There are a lot of bands that are kind of looking, like you said, at the chasing of money or materialism, that kind of thing, and for its own sake, and they're trying to transcend that. There's a good bit of that comes from like thrash, because thrash is connected to punk, and punk is very political. But as it moves to thrash, most bands kind of shed that political aspect, but they keep kind of the anti-material aspect, I feel like. And then you also have really interesting guys who made journeys like Megadeth, who, we were talking about this a little bit before we started the stream, but, Megadeth starts being very just anti-system, generally angry at everything. It's all a sham, it's all a lie. And it's still that, like, don't get me wrong, Dave Mustaine is still very anti the system, literally wrote an album called The System Have Failed. But you also see him start seeding in things about, actually maybe we should have invested more in the church and family dynamic. Washington Is Next is a famously Fed Posty song by them about, and he specifically talks about, how Washington wants to, destroy the church, destroy the family, destroy those aspects. And so it's interesting that a lot of those guys over time kind of make a journey that maybe, I don't know if, guys like Mustaine would call themselves Christian, but they certainly recognize a transition from just being generally angry at these things to recognizing that there are specific aspects of the system that are kind of undermining spirituality and traditional kind of things that make life better.
Yeah, no, definitely. And another thing too, bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier with the aesthetic of metal, is metal, like you said, is just recently is sort of like an angry young man's music. I think that's because metal is one of the most cathartic types of music that exists. Like the energy, if you've ever been to like a metal show, it's kind of unlike. It's not exactly like going and sitting down at like a jazz club or anything.
Yeah.
It's just like there's this like camaraderie there. Everyone's there having a good time, but they're also like extremely like just like pumped up. It's like audio drugs. Like you just like get really excited. You're yelling, you're like moshing, you're like body slamming each other, you're like thrashing about, you're like crowd surfing, and it's really violent in a way. Like in an auditory sense, it's like very like aggressive, and it's like it's just hammering you with the sound, and then everyone else is just like like really amped, and they're just like shoving each other in like in a friendly way. But the thing is I think that that cathartic release that you get from metal music specifically compared to sort of all other types of music, I think is the strongest. And I remember I was listening to, or I read something somewhere where it was like a leftist critique of catharsis itself, or like,
That makes sense.
or pursuing the cathartic. They're like, yeah, like catharsis, like, the cathartic impulse is like inherently fascist, and we need to stomp on this. We need to control everyone, and you need to drink your soy, and you can't bang and like be too into it, and you can't like have this warrior impulse, and you can't like have this urge to like smash heads and whatnot. And metal is like, yeah, no, like this whole genre is all about catharsis.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's what other genre, in what other genre do you basically have organized consensual combat as part of the live performance, right? Like I think most shows, most kind of more organic music performances do create a kind of a tribalistic ritual, but metal in particular incorporates combat, incorporates aggressiveness, ramps it up and celebrates it. And I think that's really important because, again, like you said, like there is an attack on all of that stuff, right? Like any representation of that is a fundamental problem for a lot of people. So of course you have the left wing case against the good, the beautiful, and the true, right? Why wouldn't you? And that's what's also interesting about metal is it doesn't completely do this, but much like people have made this argument with Warhammer 40K. So I'm going to give a shout out to Carl right here, Carl Benjamin. But because of its nature, it automatically resists kind of woke infiltration. Metal hasn't done that entirely successfully, but it is still far more based than other genres because its very nature cries out against the complete multicultural feminization, whatever, of the genre. Like its very nature keeps it from people from really being able to subvert it in many ways. And so I think that's another aspect of it that kind of gives it its particular again aesthetic, its particular feeling. You're still trapped on your mute there.
Sorry. I see here from Avalok. I like samba because I can dance with women. Yeah,
Fair.
No, I mean, that's fair, and we're not saying that there's nothing wrong with enjoying the samba. Like I'm a big classical music fan. I especially Baroque. Love my Bach. But there's a place for every music and appreciation for every kind. And if you're in the courting phase, or you just want a romantic evening with the missus or whatever, samba's great.
I mean, I'm a big bluegrass fan. Like you don't have to be a metal fan to the exclusion of all other genres. There are certainly different music for different moods and different reasons. We're just focusing on metal and its positive aspects.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. No. And to all you youngsters out there, if you want to impress your girlfriend or wife or whatever, just get some like quiet alone time, put on some music that she likes, especially like some old timey stuff, some like good stuff to foxtrot to or swing dance to. And just take her dancing like in the living room or something. She'll appreciate that. And
it's worth more points than you think. Yeah.
It'll score more points than you think. And even if she's like, oh my God, I don't know how to dance, just teach yourself a little bit beforehand. And then you lead and she's like, wow, like you're really good at dancing. Oh my gosh. And so anyways, there's a point for you. Now, continuing on to anti-materialism, tradition, conspiracy. So this is another thing which is, I don't think there's a genre of music as interested in conspiracy and like conspiracy theories as metal. Mm-hmm. Like not even close. Like the amount, I mean, and a lot of these bands, they sort of like straddle, like a band like Clutch, for instance, is really more of a rock band, but they're also very well received on like by metal acts and whatnot. And I think a lot of it has to do with the lyrical content, because I was listening to Clutch and they're kind of like a stoner rock band. They're like, yeah, we went on tour with Slayer and they were great. They were like really cool. The fans like loved us and whatnot. So they do like metal tours all the time. I remember that they did like a co-headlining tour with Mastodon, of all things, and it went great. Like the crowds loved them and stuff. And Clutch, I think, is an excellent example of like a band which really sort of tackles the sort of conspiratorial angle. Clutch is a little bit like Alex Jones, the band, but maybe not as extreme or as verbose. It's a little more sort of like cloaked in artistic artistic garments, but it's definitely there. So a great song by Clutch, which is sort of very much in terms of very much along sort of the conspiratorial lines, is a song called Power Player. And I'm just going to read just a couple of lyrics and tell me if this doesn't sound like Alex Jones. Diplomatically, emphatically deny any prior knowledge, shape, or kind. You don't know nothing about a Russian hooker. Some bloke broke in and straight up took her. Western European journalists, devious little monkeys, they're bloody, relentless. Call the consulate and burn the evidence. Don't speak another word, just burn the evidence. So I mean, yeah, that's an excellent song. Clutch, I would recommend to everybody. Or another song, X-Ray Visions, is all about like basically CIA mind control. But yeah, it's a great song. I would recommend everyone check that out. And there's of course other bands which maybe aren't quite so as on the nose as Clutch, but a thrash metal band, Testament. Mm-hmm. They have a song called they're great. They have a song called Souls of Black, and the whole thing is basically about like criticizing the power structure.
So I mean, they also have an album called New World Order. Like that second album is literally called New World Order. Yeah, and the best song on it is called New World Order. So yeah.
Yeah, no. I love that album cover too. Yeah. It's so like quintessentially 80s thrash. It looks like it's like a snapshot of a screen from like a Sega Genesis game. There's like
the skull like, rising out of the star.
Yeah, there's like Earth and then and the stars behind. Yeah, the skull like rising behind it. It's so great. But yeah, and Souls of Black, some of the lyrics from the first verse. Can't you see that the world we live in, political lies are just corporate decisions? They'll take away all the hopes, not their promises. They'll put an end to this land of the living. Look at the lost souls. They all seem so black. So, and the whole song is just about like that, basically. And of course, there are more Fed posty songs as well. So as you mentioned, Auron, Megadeth, Washington's Next, another song that I like. I won't comment or endorse the lyrics too much because of YouTube. Susan, I'm just an entertainer here. The song is called "Vote with a Bullet" by Corrosion of Conformity, and it's about kind of what you think. So. It's all
Megadeth
about.
Has. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say Megadeth has a lot of that too. Like it's not just that song. Like the entire Dystopia album is like one long thing about conspiracy theories and how the current the government has to go, and it's all controlled by international finance from the top down. Again, the album cover for The System Has Failed is Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and George W. Bush like all working together. Like so and I think Mustaine has been on Alex Jones. Like I think he's literally like been on there. So they're also very deep down that conspiracy rabbit hole.
Yeah. No, I think Neil Fallon from Clutch has also been on Alex Jones too. Like I remember I was like looking for Clutch videos on YouTube or like interviews. I was like Neil Fallon interviewed on Alex Jones, and they have a song called Prison Planet, which came out I think in 1997. And of course, Alex Jones's website is, I think it's called prisonplanet.com or something.
No, that's Paul Joseph Watson, right?
Okay, Paul Joseph Watson.
I think that's like his handle or something, right? I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Didn't PJW used to work for Alex Jones?
He did. Yeah, he was. He was like their big rising star over there until he struck out on his own. I think that's his handle. I think it's his Twitter handle.
Right. Yeah. No, and this was an old interview, so this was like,
Mhm.
let me think. It was probably like 12 years ago or more. So it was when PJW was still working with Alex Jones. But yeah, but yeah, this song "Vote with a Bullet," again, just a little lyrical sample. So it starts off. It's got this intro, and then it says "Vote," and it says, "This long hand that breaks our backs, still casting shadows on all that we see. Unjustified mercy killings is just a feeling to keep our numbers from being free. Prison for praise is not worth thinking. Sin is still in, and our ballots are shrinking. So unleash the dogs, the only solution. Forgive and forget. Fuck no, I'm talking about a revolution."
Well,
So
I don't think that's any edgier than any Rage Against the Machine lyrics, except Rage
yeah,
Against the Machine now agrees with like Apple and and Wells Fargo and stuff. So I don't think they're pushing the envelope as far as that. But another one is Glenn Danzig, right? I
oh
think
yeah,
Danzig has been on Fox News. Like I think he was on Greg Gutfeld's show, and he has with the Misfits. He has the song "Bullet," I believe is the name, where he's like talking about the Kennedy conspiracy and goes into Marilyn Monroe and all that stuff, and a couple different. Songs. So that's another one that kind of has those undertones and some of the conspiracy vibe wrapped up. Though Misfits is a little more proto metal, but then he definitely gets into metal when he gets to his solo band and that kind of thing. So
yeah, definitely. And another, we've brought up Megadeth. Another one of my favorite Megadeth songs is called "Hook in Mouth," and the
mhm.
whole thing is about. It's basically like kind of like, and this is an old song. I think it came out in '88, but it's basically like what happens when Klaus Schwab wins. Essentially, is what the song is about, and yeah, it's total. The song is totally about like mind control, cultural control, um, and yeah, it's just great. So, and basically how information is controlled and like retconned. Um, and yeah, it's really good. I'll just read sort of the last part of the song. It says, "Rewrites every history, every poem that ever was. Eliminates incompetence and those who break the law. Follow the instruction of the new ways evil book of rules, replacing rights with wrongs, the flies and records in the schools." So it's yeah, it's a great song. Uh, Let me think here. So yeah, we talked about conspiracy, metal, big into conspiracy, big into the dark, big into the anti-materialism. Certain strands, particularly power metal, folk metal, Viking metal, big into traditionalism as well. Glorification of the past. There's just so much stuff here that you can sort of get into. The catharsis and all this sort of thing. The very vibe, the manliness. It's just it's just all there and totally at odds with what you might call the globalized culture they try to sell us. But and that's why I like it. And
Mhm.
yeah, and I'm trying to think of any other sort of good suggestions. I guess sort of as we come here and wrap up, it's been about an hour. I think now is a good time to quit. Do you have any specific suggestions for people which you may have not mentioned already for them to check out?
Like I said, Judicator is a really good band. They were on my channel. Very interesting. They have an album on the First Crusade. They have an album on Napoleon. They have an album on Belisarius. So some really good stuff. And they like the stuff, probably reasons that are pretty obvious there. Again, that historical tie-in, that kind of thing. I'm trying to think of other ones that I mean, obviously should be listening to Black Sabbath, but take the time to go back and listen to, go through the Dio years. Those are some of my favorite albums: Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. And then go and then move through the other different singers. Like it's not just Paranoid and Black Sabbath. Like there are many, it's not just all Ozzy. Like they go through many different modes and things that and explore different genres of metal. They started in doom metal, but they moved to like the new wave of British metal. So make sure you get into some of the deeper stuff of that. I already mentioned Sabotage, which I like a lot. But yeah, and then Testament is also one of my favorites, but we talked about them plenty. So
Yeah. So let me think. Good recommendations. If you're into some more extreme stuff, I'd recommend Death. Death
mhm.
had some really good stuff, and also again, pretty reactionary lyrics sometimes. Like the song on the Sound of Perseverance, "Flesh and the Power It Holds," is basically like a a Bible Belt, Bible thumpers like sermon against like the dangers of lust and how it can like destroy your life and whatnot. And like a really cool metal song, Spirit Crusher, Human. That album is great. So Death for like some extreme metal. Although they got some pretty cringe environmentalist stuff. Gojira is another good sort of extreme metal band that I'd also recommend. Mastodon, huge Mastodon fan. They have a whole album, Leviathan, which is about Herman Melville's Moby Dick.
Mhm.
Crack the Sky is sort of like a weird, how do I even describe it? It's about like Russian esotericism, and like they got a multi-part 10-minute song about like the death of Tsar Nicholas II. So they're really good. If you like thrash, again, Testament, Metallica, of course, need not mention. A lot of early Megadeth stuff I really like quite a bit. In terms of folk metal, Corporate Kalani, they're pretty interesting. Yeah, there's just so many great bands out there. Crowbar is also the band that I mentioned. If you like doom, doom metal, definitely check them out. And anyone mentioned Pantera? No, but seeing as how you brought it up, definitely listen to Cowboys from Hell.
Yeah, I love that album.
Vulgar Display of Power. I think
Yeah,
Cowboys is my favorite album.
it
Like
is.
I know everyone really likes Vulgar Display of Power, which is good. Don't get me wrong, I like it. Rise, that's another kind of Fed Posty song from that album, which was really good. But I like Cowboys from Hell. That's my favorite.
They
Um,
feel like they're willing to have a little more range there, and then
yeah,
and that makes it a little more interesting, I think.
yeah, definitely. And some of their later albums are kind of interesting. Like I thought, Great Southern Trendkill was an
Mhm.
interesting album. Drag the Waters. I like the cowbell on the intro. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Floods is also really cool, dark, strange song, and that whole song is basically about a global flood destroying humanity. So, I mean, what are the connections there? Pretty obvious. Um, Anthrax, yes, Anthrax is good. So, I guess sort of as we close now, I have one more question. Could you tell us any guilty pleasures that you may have as far as metal? Can you think of one guilty pleasure of a band where you're like, it's kind of cringe, but I like these guys?
Well, like I said, I love Stripers, so that's probably going to be one for some people. But I really I enjoy a lot of hair metal without any problem. Like I can listen to Scorpions, I can listen to Motley Crue, I can listen to Def Leppard. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy the deeper stuff, the more complicated stuff, the more historical or the heavier stuff. But I really can enjoy all of those pop metal bands without any easy problem. So if those are guilty pleasures, then I'm completely guilty. No shame here.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess probably one for me. Yeah, I do also like the hair metal stuff as well. Twisted Sister. It's fun. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Someone mentioned Rhapsody of Fire.
Oh,
It's
they're just
real.
good.
It's really cheesy, but I'm not gonna lie. It's really fun to listen to.
Yeah.
I love it. I remember I had like a little landscaping business, and that's something I would do all the time. I'd like listen to Rhapsody while I was, cutting grass all day. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm just like feeling pumped. I feel like I'm going on a quest every time I go outside to work on someone's lawn. So yeah, it's good stuff. All right. That's it. Thank you guys. It's been about an hour. Auron, thank you very much for coming on. Where again, for the people to know, where can they find you, and what are some things you have coming up?
Yeah, like I said, I've got the. If you go to the Twitter, it's got the Find My Friends link, and that's got kind of all the different places. I've got the Odyssey channel, the Rumble channel. I've got a Gab, the Twitter, the YouTube channel, of course, and then the Substack. Like I said, I've got stuff coming out there soon, so that's a good place to check in. I've been caught with I've got a bunch of stuff I'm writing for other outlets right now. So once that gets like announced, I'll pass that around as well. But that's why my main channels have been slow, because I've been doing content for everybody else at the moment. So I'll get more of that out. But the Twitter, that link tree is just a good way to find everything.
Excellent, very good. Yes, and as far as new stuff on this channel, my job has changed, so it's less weather dependent and sporadic and unpredictable. So it's easier to sort of schedule streams like this. I'm going to try and schedule some more streams coming in the future. Not sure exactly what yet. The music thing just has been on the back burner for a while, and Auron and I'm glad we could come and have this talk. I've been putting out the next video to come out on my channel will be the chapter 2 of Reflections of a Russian Statesman by Konstantin Petrovich Pobyedonotsev. Really great book. A lot of interesting counter-revolutionary insights within there. So I'll be continuing to crank that out. As far as anything else, stay tuned. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. And for everyone, I'll talk to you next time. Patriarch.